Steve Miller Band came at us in what I would call two stages. The first, a San Francisco bluesy rock band during the late 60s, and the second stage as one of the top-selling pop rock acts of the mid to late 70s. His first recordings established his early style as a kind of a blues-influenced rock band, but after a serious injury in a car accident, and then a health issue, Steve took a year or so off to heal and reinvent himself and his band to a more pop rock sound, and in 1973 wrote and produced some compact, melodic, catchy songs that led to his album called The Joker, which would net him a #1 hit for his title track. 3 years later, Fly Like an Eagle eclipsed its predecessor in terms of quality and sales. And then came Book of Dreams, and in the early 80s he briefly took on a new wave tinge and even hit the charts with the Abracadabra album. Then he returned to his blues rock roots, where he seems happy still today. Let's take a quick look back on a guy whose 70s classic rock songs are still holding up strong today, just as he does. Steve Miller was born October 5th, 1943 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then the family moved to Dallas, Texas. His mother, Bertha, whom he described as a remarkable jazz-influenced singer, and his father, George, a physician known as Sonny, who in addition to his profession as a pathologist was a jazz enthusiast. He also owned one of the first tape recorders. It was with this tape recorder that he would go to a local club and record Les Paul and Mary Ford. Soon the two couples became good friends. Les Paul and Mary Ford were married soon after in the Millers' home, with Steve's father and mother being the best man and matron of honor at the ceremony. Les was eventually to become Steve's godfather. Les Paul would show a young Steve how to play a few one-finger simple chords on the guitar. One day Steve's father would record his son playing the guitar. Now, at the time, Steve said he didn't know his father was doing this, and it made him a bit angry. Later on, Les and Mary came over for a visit, and when his father wanted to play the recordings for them to listen to, Steve said no. But then something happened that was to make young Steve sit up and take notice. Les Paul offered Steve a quarter to listen to the tapes of him playing. Steve said this really got him to thinking. By the time he was 12, Steve had formed a band named the Marksman Combo and was booking and promoting the group. One of the members was Boz Scaggs. Boz and Steve would later team up again at the University of Wisconsin in a group called the Ardells, later called the Fabulous Night Trains. After college, Steve told his parents that he had decided he wanted to be a musician. He moved to Chicago, where he was to get the chance to listen to and jam with some of the best musicians at the time. Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Buddy Guy, just to name a few. He would play in a few more groups and then head to New York, and then back to Chicago, and finally deciding to head back to Dallas and try to finish his education. But he soon got fed up with the academic politics at the university and took a Volkswagen bus his father had given him and headed off to San Francisco. After arriving, he used his last $5 to see the Butterfield Blues Band and Jefferson Airplane at the Fillmore. He fell in love with the vibrant San Francisco music scene and decided to stay. It was soon after he arrived, around 1966, that he would form the Steve Miller Blues Band. Around a year or so later, they would become just the Steve Miller Band, with Steve's friend and old bandmate Boz Scaggs climbing aboard to help out on some vocals. He would be with them for a few years before moving on to start his own solo career. But supposedly, before the name change, they were to do a show backing Chuck Berry at the Fillmore Auditorium. Steve says he was asked for him and his band to back Berry, and he said sure, but he said that Chuck would have to commit to rehearsing a couple of days before the show. Chuck agreed. The sound was so good that Mercury Records wanted to record a live album on it. So Steve negotiated the deal that night of the show. They agreed to do the Chuck Berry Live at the Fillmore Auditorium album for $1. Why? Steve says because it was Chuck Berry, and we loved him so much. Steve admits to being a big Johnny Johnson and Chuck Berry fan. Some say this happened before the name change, some don't. Steve himself says that it was just the Steve Miller Band. On the album, it just says the Miller Band, and then lists the names of the members. So it's anybody's guess of the name that they were actually using at the time. If anyone has any insight on this, please feel free to leave it in the comments section. The Steve Miller Band signed a recording contract with Capitol EMI Records and started recording albums and touring with a little success. Steve said they had signed a 7-record deal and were down to their last one. He was really thinking about packing it in and looking for something else to make a living. But he was given some time off to kind of reinvent himself when he broke his neck in a car accident and subsequently developed hepatitis, which put him out of commission for most of 1972 and early 1973. He spent his recuperation time reinventing himself as a blues-influenced pop rocker. He was to let go of his blues roots-based music for a time. In August of 1973, they went into the studio to record the last album of their contract. One of the songs on the recording was The Joker. Steve says he didn't think much of the song, but when they were going through the tracks with the executive producers, one of the guys from the label said, "Hey, this is kind of a catchy song," so they decided to release it first. Steve told them that they were getting ready to go out on a 60-city tour and at least have the album out in the stores in those cities. They did. Steve and the band took off on tour, and when they came back 60 cities later, they had their first number one. Released in October of 1973, The Joker topped the U.S. Billboard Hot 100s in early 1974 and reached the top 20 in Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands. The Joker was to sell over 1 million copies and become certified platinum. Then he decided to take 3 years off. He purchased a farm and built his own recording studio, where he crafted the successful albums Fly Like an Eagle and Book of Dreams at the same time. Fly Like an Eagle was released in 1976 and eclipsed The Joker in terms of quality and sales, selling over 4 million copies in spite of the long downtime in between. It also gave Miller his second number one hit with Rockin' Me, plus several other singles. Book of Dreams was almost as successful, selling over 3 million copies and producing several hits as well. All of the hits from Miller's first 3 pop-oriented albums were put into a compilation album, Greatest Hits 1974 to 1978, and it has gone on to sell over 17 million albums to date. His career started to taper off after a quick try at some new wave-style music with the Abracadabra album in 1982. After that, he just went back to doing some of the blues and jazz-style music, but he sure left his mark on the mid-70s pop rock scene, that's for sure. Steve did a great job of writing and picking out and recording some of very sellable songs for FM radio during this time. His guitar playing on the recordings was very commercial. Considering that he was basically a jazz blues guitarist, he wasn't the typical blues rock guitarist of that time. He was more, like I said, blues and jazz influenced. Steve believes that all music is blues-based. All music comes from the blues, and says he was grateful that he was able to get on stage in his younger years and learn his blues from all the greats he met and jammed with up in Chicago. He said he just didn't have to sit around and learn it from a record. He was right in the middle of it. Miller calls Stevie Ray Vaughan a monster player, but also adds that Brother Jimmy Vaughan is his favorite. The Joker was his biggest selling song. He says the biggest question he gets asked about it the most is, what does the pompatus of love mean? He says he got the phrase from an old doo-wop song and really didn't know what it meant. Here's a few more things about Steve that might interest you. When asked what makes a great artist, he says presence. Steve has seen them all, Zeppelin, Hendrix, Cream, and the list goes on. But he says the greatest artist, in his opinion, is Frank Sinatra. When he had a chance to go see him perform for the first time, he said, "Okay, let's go." But when Sinatra came out, he went, wow. From the first time he opened his mouth, Steve said he felt like Sinatra was singing just to him. He said it was his presence. He also said Elvis Presley had the same qualities. Steve was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016, and afterward he pretty much spoke his mind on how things are run there, which I'm sure many of us know already, but let's hear a little of what Steve had to say. All I can say is, tell it like it is, Steve.
The whole process needs to be changed from the top to the bottom. Doesn't need to be this hard. There's nothing fancy going on out there. They need to get their legal work straight. They need to respect the artists they say they're honoring, which they don't. I have no licensing agreements with these people. They're trying to steal footage. They're trying to make me indemnify them. When they told me I was inducted, they said, you can have 2 tickets, one for your wife and one for yourself. Want another one? It's $10,000. Sorry, that's the way it goes. I said, I'm playing here. What about my band? They make this so unpleasant that they came this close. We're not going to wrap this one up. I'm going to wrap you up. You go sit down over there and learn something.
As for me, I like Steve Miller. Always have. I really appreciate growing up and having his music to listen to. His 8-tracks and cassettes were always either in the deck or in the tape case of my car ready to rock on down the highway. I still have a CD around here of the greatest hits. If you were in your teens in the mid-'70s and listened to rock and roll, you knew who Steve Miller was and his songs. Most of them you knew by heart. My favorite will always be The Joker. How about you? Leave me your favorite Steve Miller song in the comments section below. Steve is still out there touring and playing all those hits. You can find out all of his tour dates and buy some of his music and merch on his website, which is www.stevemillerband.com. I'll leave a link in the description below. If you enjoyed the video here on Steve Miller, give it a thumbs up. Also subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. I'd sure appreciate it. Y'all have a great day, and I'll catch you again soon. Thanks so much for watching.